So Prime Video is beating the snot out of Netflix this month. They're adding a ton of great movies, including a handful of highly underrated movies. I'm going to talk about those, as well as a bunch of fantastic flicks for Halloween.
I got it!
Then after talking about all those older movies, we'll talk about some of the newer stuff coming to Prime throughout the month of September. Thanks to Mando for sponsoring this video. We'll talk more about them in a bit, but let's start off with some of those underrated picks, which includes 21 Grams. Now this is a pretty melancholy movie. It is about people who are pulled together after some traumatic events, and it's from director Alejandro Iñárritu, most famous for The Revenant, Birdman, and Babel, and Amores Perros. I don't think this is his best movie, but it's not far behind some of his best. One of Chris Rock's first movies is still far and away his best. It's titled CB4. This is a parody of a rap group.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all. I'm blickety black, blacker than black, I'm blacker than black, yo, because I'm black and I'm back.
And it came out not long after the birth of gangster rap, and so CB4 is essentially, this is Spinal Tap for 90s hip-hop. Meaning the more you know about 90s hip-hop, the funnier this movie will be. But even if you know nothing, it's still an absolutely hilarious Chris Rock movie with a pretty hysterical premise. They're also adding what I think is one of Kevin Smith's most underrated movies, Chasing Amy. In this movie, Ben Affleck plays a guy who just has a crush on a lesbian that, you know, he does not have access to. And the movie itself is essentially a romantic comedy, but it's a Kevin Smith romantic comedy. In fact, he did this not long after Clerks and Mallrats, and it's got a very similar sense of humor, but it also touches on a lot of very sensitive subjects and a lot of heavy sexual themes that will be too intense for some viewers. Another movie that's going to be too intense for some viewers is Dread. I absolutely love this movie. I think it's a total crime that we do not have a sequel to this by now. Not only is it miles better than the Stallone version, Carl Urban nails it. Dude never takes his mask off in this movie. The action is absolutely unhinged. It's got a stunning look to it, and the premise is pretty badass as well. It's essentially the same premise as The Raid Redemption. They're also adding one of the greatest political comedies ever made, and what's so great about it is it has nothing to do with real-world politics in election. This is one of Reese Witherspoon's first big starring roles. She's this obnoxious, overachieving student that's running for class president. Matthew Broderick plays a teacher that is basically just gradually going to war with her. This is from director Alexander Payne, who would go on to do movies like Sideways and Nebraska. Election, still one of his highest rated movies. If you're like me and you notice you kind of have to do a little sniff test throughout the day, then listen up, because today's sponsor, Mando, can definitely help you. And that's because Mando is a whole body deodorant. We're talking pits, packages, belly buttons, crevices, cracks, folds, and feet. Unlike a lot of traditional deodorants that just try to mask odor with fragrance, Mando is formulated and powered by mandelic acid in order to stop odor before it starts. It's more like a pre-deodorant that reduces odors all day and keeps BO under control for up to 72 hours. Mando was actually created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal BO was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. And Mando is clinically proven to control odor better than with just a shower and soap alone. Apparently 12 hours after a shower, the average man's grundle odor rates a 5 out of 10, but with Mando, they rate a 0 out of 10 12 hours after a shower. Mando comes in 4 scents. I've got Mount Fuji here. I love it. It's nice and fresh, and you can see it's a white stick. It goes on completely clear. It's also available in a bourbon leather scent, clover woods, and a pro sport scent. Speaking of sports, they've got deodorant wipes for when you're on the go or at the gym. Maybe more importantly, they've got this whole body deodorant. Again, you just put it on, rubs in completely clear, and you put this anywhere that might get funky after a while. I recommend the starter pack bundle for new customers. You get 1 whole stick of deodorant, the cleansing bar or the cream, plus 2 free products like the wipes or body wash, you also get free shipping, and for a limited time, my viewers are gonna save an additional $5 off. That ends up being a 40% discount when you add all that up, and all you've gotta do is use my link in the video description. Use my code FLICK, again, to get $5 off that starter pack plus the free shipping. It's a great deal, but speaking of great stuff, let's talk about the rest of the movies on this list. For a classic crime movie with a bit of action, we're gonna go to 1985 with a Jon Voight flick titled Runaway Train. This also stars Eric Roberts. They play a couple of escaped convicts on a literal runaway train with no means of stopping it. Very much like the Denzel Washington movie Unstoppable. This is not directed by Tony Scott, so it's not as fast and frenetic, but still just a solid, like real masculine movie with Jon Voight. It's pretty fantastic if you're into that stuff like I am. And then for just a hard-hitting drama, I mean one that will bum you out incredibly effectively, is Revolutionary Road. This stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet in the first movie that they would do together since Titanic, and it's a very different type of movie in every way imaginable. This is directed by Sam Mendes, who's most famous for movies like American Beauty, Jarhead, and Skyfall. And while Revolutionary Road is not one of his more noteworthy movies, the performances in this movie are absolutely amazing. They play a married couple with a whole host of problems. They spend a lot of the movie screaming and crying at each other, but they're both amazing at it. And like I said, this one is a downer of a flick, but it's incredibly well done. And if you're into high drama stuff, this is going to be one of the top picks for the month. But if you like artsier stuff, I cannot recommend Nocturnal Animals enough. This stars Jake Gyllenhaal and Amy Adams. The less you know about it, the better. It does deal with some pretty intense things, including sexual assault, and it is quite graphic in this movie and upsetting. Amy Adams and Jake Gyllenhaal are both great, but you also have an amazing sort of character actor role from Michael Shannon and Aaron Taylor Johnson. I mean, he's gone on to do some incredibly interesting characters very recently. This was the first time I saw him playing a wildly different character, and I was blown away by his small performance in this movie. He steals every scene he's in, and there's no secret as to why he's become such a big star since this movie came out. But I will warn you, it's got an unusual structure, it's very artsy, but it is so effective, and it tells a story that's incredibly unique, and again, the less you know, the better. And I should also warn you that the opening sequence, the credit sequence to this movie is just... it's not for everybody. If you're easily disturbed visually, you may want to pass on it. Just keep in mind, if you do decide to pursue this movie, curiosity killed the cat. But as we transition into some of the Halloween picks, I still got a highly underrated one. In fact, probably Studio A24's most underrated movie of all time. It's titled Ghost Story. Rooney Mara stars in this. She's in almost every scene, and her husband, played by Casey Affleck, dies very early on in the story, and then his ghost haunts her. I think there's a fair comparison here to some of the films of Terrence Malick, so if you like his work, there's a lot to love with this one. But this is just a straight-up art film from director David Lowery, who would go on to do The Green Knight not long after this. In fact, I think The Green Knight was a difficult movie to enjoy. While I did like it, I would say if you could not connect with The Green Knight, you're gonna have an even harder time connecting with a ghost story. But they're also adding Tobe Hooper's life force. If the name Tobe Hooper does not sound familiar, he did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, arguably one of the greatest horror movies of all time. And 10 years after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he created this movie about space vampires, and it's pretty fantastic. Not only does it have a bunch of old school practical effects, full frontal nudity, which is something I feel like you almost never see in movies anymore, especially movies like this one. It was also co-written by Dan O'Bannon, who's most famous for writing Alien, and just gets increasingly wilder and weirder the further along you go. This is a top recommendation for Halloween, and I've got a lot more coming, like Wes Craven's Red Eye. Not a strong recommendation. In fact, this one can be a bit slow-paced, but it does star Cillian Murphy as the villain. He plays this really creepy guy who sits on a plane next to Rachel McAdams and then reveals he's got this really devious plot. Most of the movie does take place in 2 seats on an airplane, so as long as you know what you're getting into, Red Eye's got some pretty solid twists and turns. And then, believe it or not, I actually recommend the reboot of Child's Play.
Something's wrong with Chucky.
This came out in 2019. It stars Aubrey Plaza, and I think is an excellent Chucky movie. Now, I'm not a big fan of the original. I think it's all right. I'm not a big fan of the sequels either. They get really kind of nasty and, for lack of a better word, trashy. I mean, that's really what some of those Chucky movies are. This one is a solid reboot. It's creepy, he's a little bit different. Again, Aubrey Plaza's fantastic, and it's got some clever things going on in it. I mean, there are a lot of movies about dolls trying to kill people, and somehow this Child's Play reboot managed to make that a little bit more fresh than I expected. But some of my top Halloween picks include Army of Darkness, the finale to the Evil Dead trilogy that somehow went in a completely different direction than any of the other movies and still works incredibly well. It's funnier, it's sillier, it's crazier, yet it is still just a classically wild movie with, again, loads. It's an overload of practical effects. It's too much to look at times in this movie. In fact, I now am realizing it has been years since I've watched Army of Darkness. I will definitely be watching it this year in preparation for Halloween. Same goes for Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell.
Soon it will be you who comes begging to me.
This was his return to horror after doing a few thrillers in the Spider-Man movies, and it's just as wild and weird as The Evil Dead. Now, it doesn't hold as special of a place in the hearts of movie lovers like Evil Dead, but in terms of just funhouse, wild, crazy stuff, Drag Me to Hell's got it. I mean, there's the classic gypsy fight and all loads of gross out moments. There's a possessed goat. Justin Long is in the mix, and this movie is a lot of fun to watch and incredibly creepy at the same time. Another funny one that also stars Bruce Campbell, this is one he did years after Army of Darkness and Evil Dead, is Bubba Hotep. In this one, he plays a man in a nursing home that believes he is Elvis. His roommate is a black man that believes he's JFK.
They dyed me this color.
So that stuff's funny enough, but then supernatural things start happening, again with the practical effects. And while this one's not done by Sam Raimi, it's definitely like an homage to classic Sam Raimi movies. Meaning, if you love Evil Dead and Army of Darkness and you've never seen Bubba Hotep, make it one of the first ones you watch off of this list. But if you've never seen any Bruce Campbell movie, you might be a bit lost if you start with Bubba Hotep. And they're also adding a bunch of classic monster movies like The Mummy, Dracula, The Invisible Man, Wolfman, even Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. I would say even if you're not interested in sitting down and spending 90 minutes with one of these classic monster movies, they work aesthetically at Halloween time just for pure ambiance. But I'll say if you do want somewhat newer ones, Francis Ford Coppola's version of Bram Stoker's Dracula is still a banger. Like, I know it's weird, I know it's even weirder that Keanu Reeves just kind of does his California accent in it. The movie has its flaws, but if you look past the small handful of flaws in this movie, it is a dazzling horror flick with all these classic elements and amazing costumes. I mean, I feel like it's easy to forget how just insane and over the top this entire production is. It really is well worth revisiting around Halloween. I'll even say the Benicio del Toro Wolfman. It's not a great movie, but at Halloween time, it's still just a really cool sort of vintage watch. Now, here's the full list of everything that they're adding on the first. It's a bunch of classic movies. We've got Basic Instinct, V for Vendetta, The Usual Suspects, The Big Lebowski, Swingers, Species, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and a lot more. I've put some of my top picks in bold, but just pause the screen if you want more time with this list. By the way, the full list of all the movies I'm actually discussing can always be found down in the top pinned comment.
You bid $2,000 on the Snack Shack at the swimming pool.
Actually, we bid $3. It's a total shithole. Yeah, but it's our shithole.
But for new release movies on the 3rd, they're adding one titled Snack Shack that was in theaters over the summer, and I actually really liked this movie. Now, it is a simple coming-of-age movie. It's about a couple of boys that open a snack stand at a local public pool, and you get classic coming-of-age stuff, trying to fall in love with girls, all of that. But this movie hooked me from the very beginning. You're following a couple of 14-year-old boys that are hustlers. In fact, the opening scene is of them gambling at a racetrack while they're supposed to be on a school field trip. And so this movie hooked me from the beginning. It felt almost like classic Scorsese mixed with like Meatballs or something like that. It's an odd mix. And this is not for kids. It's got very vulgar language in it. These two boys are fairly mature for their age, which is what made this movie so interesting. Honestly, I wish it had a little bit more to say because I enjoyed the beginning of the movie so much. It ends up feeling a bit like something I've seen before, which was a little bit disappointing, but I still enjoyed so much of the fresh ideas in this movie, I wanted to recommend it.
Give me a up, kid.
You're unbelievable.
On the 12th, they're adding Puss in Boots, The Last Wish. This has been on Netflix for a while, but I am mentioning it here because it's from the Shrek universe, but it does have a new and interesting animation style that I appreciated. Plus, my kids loved it. But then on the 13th, the Grand Tour returns. I haven't seen them do a new one in quite a while, and I love everything that these guys put out. They just know how to have a good time, and the production of this and Top Gear when they were on it is top-notch. And apparently this is the finale. This is going to be the last one. And even though I would gladly welcome multiple farewell tours from these guys, they are billing this as the last one, which means it should be fairly epic. I enjoy all their adventures. If you've never watched the show, I highly recommend it. I mean, it's probably my favorite reality TV show of all time. In a somewhat similar vein to Snack Shack, they're adding Richard Linklater's Everybody Wants Some. This is his spiritual sequel to Dazed and Confused, which is still like one of the greatest movies he ever directed. And while this one's not quite as good, it's got very similar vibes. You follow a college baseball team. They're all living in one big house. And yeah, there is some baseball stuff in the movie, but it's mostly just a hang. You're hanging out with these guys, and if you've been a fan of Glenn Powell in anything he's done recently, whether it be Twisters, Anyone But You, or Top Gun Maverick, he was in this first. He steals every scene he's in. A lot of the other actors are great in it, but I had never seen him before back when this came out, and I was really surprised and expected to see him become a big star, and sure enough, I was right, he has. By the way, if you do want my instant reaction to new release movies like Alien Romulus, I do that in my email newsletter. It's free to sign up. Here's a link. Go to DarrenVanDam.com. I send one email out every Friday. It's a quick read, and it just features reviews of things I've watched recently.
I just had sex. I'm about to eat nachos! It's the greatest moment of my life!
On the 23rd, they're adding a rom-com starring Daniel Radcliffe titled What If? Now, I have not seen this movie, but the trailer looks quite good, and I am a big fan of Daniel Radcliffe. And I say that as someone who was never into Harry Potter. I mean, I was kind of at the generation that just missed it for the most part, and I have just come to really appreciate not only his dramatic acting, but maybe more so his comedic acting. I mean, there's the Weird Al movie he did, The Lost City, Guns Akimbo, Swiss Army Man, Horns, another one I just mentioned recently that is currently included with Prime, actually. And then at the end of the month, Under the Wire, they're adding Javi Gutierrez's third favorite movie of all time, Paddington 2. No, that's not a joke. I highly recommend this movie. Both Paddington movies are exceptional. The second one is somehow miles better than the first. It comes across almost as a family-friendly Wes Anderson movie, which there's not many of those. I think there's only one. It is just wildly enjoyable for kids and adults. Kind of a rare thing, and And you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, here's Nicolas Cage's reaction right after seeing it.
Paddington 2 is incredible.
I f***ing told you.
Now, I already showed you the full list of everything Prime is adding. Here are some titles recently added to Freevee. You can access these directly through Prime Video or directly through a Freevee app. It's essentially Amazon's free streaming service, very much like Tubi. They don't populate it with a lot of stuff, but here are the new titles getting added this month. Thanks again to Mando for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check out their link down in the video description if you want to start smelling better like I am. But I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Prime video, and you will see me on the next one.